What if I told you that one of the most emotional real-life stories tied to Icarly wasn't even to do with the show itself? It involves Jennette McCurdy, who played Sam Puckett, and a connection to someone you probably don't even associate with Nickelodeon, Paul Glazer. Hi, my name's Lucy and welcome back to my channel. Their lives intersect in a way that's quiet, unexpected, and honestly kind of heartbreaking. Because behind the light of a kids' family sitcom, there was a lot of dark stuff happening behind the scene. There was a reality that couldn't have been more different. So if you're aware of Jennette McCurdy, aka Sam Puckett, you'll know that she's now retired from acting and gone into a career of being an author. She's now an author and a director as well as producer. Jennette McCurdy has published 2 books at this point, to my knowledge. I have read her first book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, but for this video let's focus on her new book, Half His Age. Half His Age sounds like a very interesting book, and it just so happens that it's based on a true story, which is the story we're going to dive into today. Just want to point out that I've not yet read Jennette McCurdy's new book. When I heard about this, I was like, oh my gosh, guys, we need to talk about it. So if you ever watched Icarly growing up, I certainly did. It was and remains to be one of my favourite sitcoms ever. It's just such a comfort show for me. You probably remember Sam as loud and chaotic and, you know, the buttersock sarcastic best friend. But Jennette McCurdy's real life was very different. It was a completely different story. In her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, Jennette opens up about being under a lot of control by her mother and the creator, who a lot of people believe is Dan Schneider, but she doesn't specifically name him officially, but it is kind of obvious. It's one of those things that's literally obvious. Anyway, she goes on to discuss being under intense control, her complicated relationship with fame as a whole, and the emotional toll that it took on her as a human being, as a child actor. But somehow, woven into this large Hollywood web was Paul Glazer. Jennette McCurdy didn't just grow up famous. She grew up in an environment where success wasn't optional, and she was essentially being forced into being the breadwinner for her family. So there was a lot of pressure on her at such a young age. Her mother pushed her into acting at a very young age, controlling everything from her career decisions to her eating habits. Now that was a really dark turn in the book, and like I'm really sad for her that she had to go through that. By the time she landed the role in Icarly, she was already dealing with anxiety, identity issues, and an overwhelming amount of pressure to perform and succeed. And whilst the show had massive success, behind the scenes things weren't always as fun as they seemed, not from her perspective anyway. She talked about feeling uncomfortable on set at times, about blurred boundaries, and about how difficult it kind of became to separate herself from her character, which would lead into the identity issue. Sam was loud and fearless. Jennette wasn't allowed to be. Now this is where the broader Hollywood ecosystem comes in, because Jennette's story isn't isolated, as we all know. It reflects a system where young actors are surrounded by adults who prioritise production schedules over personal well-being. In the grand scheme of things, in any kind of job you go for now, there's always some kind of toxicity about the environment that you work in. Now, there's no dramatic moment where Jennette McCurdy and Paul Glazer collided in a big cinematic way. It just it was one of those things that happened gradually over time.
Jennette McCurdy revealed that she began a relationship with Paul Glazer when she was around 18 years old, and he was much older than her, I believe around 30. Paul Glazer worked in the script and continuity department on Icarly, and that's exactly how they met. So over time, the two got close behind the scenes, and they were eventually spotted on vacation vacation in Hawaii. In interviews and in her memoir, she described the relationship as emotionally complicated and said that there was a major power imbalance. At that time, Jennette was still very vulnerable. She was dealing with intense pressure from child stardom, family expectations, and the emotional aftermath of growing up in the entertainment industry. Now, what makes this story stand out to a lot of fans is how honestly Jennette talks about looking back at that period now. She's said that when she was younger, she viewed certain situations very differently as she does today, which of course, you know, we all do. And looking back at a situation like that, you can begin to realise how inappropriate it actually was. Ever since certain things within the Nickelodeon network have been revealed and people have been revisiting old episodes of Icarly, there's this whole extra layer of context surrounding what Jennette says she was privately experiencing during that chapter of her life. As a whole, Jennette frames this relationship as something tied to her emotional state at the time, and that because of the unhealthy dynamics she had growing up, she thought that it was acceptable. She thought that that was okay at that time. That's one reason her story connected with so many readers. She talks about these experiences very reflectively rather than just for shock value.
Jennette eventually walked away from acting, not because she failed, but because she chose herself and what she wanted to pursue in her life. She chose to tell her story. She chose to reclaim her identity and to step outside a system that kind of defined her for too long. And in doing so, she sparked a bigger conversation about how young actors are treated and whether or not Hollywood is actually changing. But then again, I guess she could go for a lot of industries that don't really get spoken about as much as Hollywood. Since her book Half His Age came out, Jennette has been describing her relationship with Paul as very complex, involving secrecy, guilt, and ultimately having a power dynamic, which is something you can clearly see there anyway. He had a girlfriend at the time he started seeing Jennette, and eventually he ended the relationship with this said girlfriend and pursued the relationship with Jennette. Jennette has come out saying that, you know, it took a huge emotional toll on her to go through what she was going through anyway, but for then that to be on top, especially reflecting back upon it. Anyway, that's it for this video, guys. Tell me what you think. Kind of reminds me of the scenario with Liz Gillies and her now husband. I believe they met on the set of Victoria. If you really enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Bye for now.